Hi everyone, this is Mona. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome back to day 3 of the IMA for Beginners webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about IMA features. Real quick, if you can hear me and you can see the presentation, please use the chat feature to respond to the following questions. Have you ever reviewed the Changes tab to determine your item's location in the IMA workflow? Just answer yes or no. And then the second question, how do you typically do change requests? Do you sync them? Do you use the changes grid? Do you manually edit? Or you've never created a change request? So if you could just respond to that, and I will get back to those in a moment. We're going to take care of some quick housekeeping while you guys respond. As a reminder, please put your phone on mute when you're not speaking. It really helps cut down on the background noise. And if you're using the audio on your computer instead of calling in, be sure to mute your computer's microphone. Please wait to audibly ask questions until you see the lovely blue bubble graphic with the question mark. Or if I ask, please try to keep questions on topic and minimal. But please feel free to submit questions at any time via the chat. So looking over at the chat, looks like a lot of you have not ever viewed the Changes tab, and a lot of people aren't actually aware of it and what you can actually see on that. But it can actually be really helpful and can having to take the time to reach out to the help desk because it could be a simple answer for you. And looks like one person syncs, there's a manually edit, never created a change request. But haven't tried. There's another manual. Okay, so it gives me a good idea. Tomorrow we're focusing on maintenance in IMA, so we're going to be really specific, and I'm going to demonstrate some very specific change requests for you. Today is we're talking about some different features, and included in that is the changes grid. So that's why I went ahead and asked this question today. So we're just going to give you your maintenance and make your change requests. So if I'm not able to answer your question or I miss it in the chat, please email vendoruniversity@serioushc.com, and I will be sure to get you an answer for your question. If you haven't been with us the last 2 days, I'm Mona. I'm the Instructional Design and Training Manager with the Vendor and Item Support team. On Monday, we went over the basics and terminology. Yesterday, we went through setting up new items in the new item grid. And today, we are going to be discussing IMA features. We're going to cover Quick Search and Changes tab. We're also going to cover the Returned Items task list, Change Existing Items, Data Catalog Notifications, and General Task List. So if you look over on the Data Catalog menu in that menu bar, this first picture here, you can see there's a lot more than just new items in grade history that we cover. There's also this general task list that we're going to touch on as well. So first up is Quick Search and Changes tab. So a lot of you have probably used Quick Search. I would expect that maybe all of you have. But basically it provides a summary of the basic information and the workflow status for the single KSN. It's like a snapshot for your item, and it's the quickest way to determine where your item might be in the workflow and if it's become operational yet. So to get to Quick Search, in this menu bar, you will see Search. You can either click Search or you can hover over Search and click Quick Search. But you can just click Search and it does the same thing. And then there is a drop-down menu where you can select the type of criteria that you want to search for. Now, as a vendor, I know there's a lot of options here, but as a vendor, probably the only ones you will use KSN, core item number for Sears, excuse me. Throat got scratchy there, sorry about that. Core item number for Sears or UPC. And if you select UPC, you can actually enter either the RG10 or SG10. It doesn't just have to be the RG10. And one of the things that's nice about whenever you select a new criteria, underneath the text box field, it'll give you an example of that criteria. So this is KSN, and if you remember from Monday, I mentioned how The KSN numbers actually have this dash and a check digit at the end, but we don't use it in a lot of instances. And this would be an example of that. If you actually entered that dash and check digit, you wouldn't get anything in your search results. So you select the type of criteria you want to search for, you enter your criteria, and you just click search. And here, this screen, this is the core item number was selected. And in the example, you can see it's 007-12345. So it's the 3-digit Sears division dash and then the 4 or 5-digit item number. And this example is existing, so it's operational. Next steps is blank because there's nothing that needs to be done under next steps. And whenever you do a quick search for an item, you will always be able to see your KSN on this quick search page. And if it's a Sears item, you will also always be able to see your core item number. Another thing to take note of, these boxes down here can kind of give you an idea as to the location of your item. Whenever an item's operational, they will all say complete going across the screen, and they will be filled in blue. Now in this example, you can see that hold state, bridging, and operational are not filled in with the color, and they say not reached yet. So this item is in process. It has not become operational yet. Workflows rows is colored in with green, and it has a date. Now this date is the date that it actually started being processed, the date that it was initiated. And up here under status, you can see it's in process, next steps. Sometimes under next steps, it'll tell you what row it's in and who you can contact for assistance. So this is saying it's in the vendor role. Please contact the vendor to approve, which would be you all. So then you know that there's some sort of action required by you to complete this through your role. So in this example, the status is existing changes pending. Now what that means is this item is operational. It's already gone through the initial setup process, but there is a change request or a new vendor pack or something that has put it back into the workflow role. Now under next steps, it says entity is currently in a workflow role. Well, that can be a bit confusing because workflow role actually refers to any of the manual roles. So it could be referring to vendor or merchant, inventory analyst, or supply chain. So that's why this is kind of, it's a snapshot of your item. You can kind of get an idea of where your item is, but sometimes it doesn't give you enough information on this page, or sometimes it can be a little misleading, which we're going to get into here in a second. So you know that there's some action needed on this item, but you don't know who needs to be completing the action. So if it says workflow role, you can click the Changes tab, which is over here on the far right. And underneath the workflow state, you will be able to see what role that the item is in. So this says vendor, so that means that there's some action that's required by you. So this is a scenario that happens quite a bit. After making changes to an item, the merchant or inventory analyst keeps telling me to approve my items, but I'm pretty sure that I did. And when I do a quick search for the KSN, it shows that it's in the merchant role. So I'm sure that's happened to many of you at some point. It's confusing because you do a quick search for the item and it says that it's in the merchant role, yet your merchant or inventory analyst keeps telling you that you need to approve it. So if that ever happens, you need to kind of take a deeper look at your item, and you can do that again by clicking the Changes tab. Because if you remember on Monday, we talked about how there are different parts to your item, different pieces or components. You have your item, your KSN, your vendor pack, your package, and your core item number. And there's more pieces to it even, but the other pieces aren't really too relevant to you as a vendor. But those pieces of your item can actually get separated into different roles. Ideally, when we're setting up the item, it's best to try to keep the pieces together as much as possible. But sometimes if they get returned, they will get separated, and that's when the quick search screen doesn't exactly give you enough information. And that's when you can click the Changes tab. So here, this is, again, an in-process item. We can see all the pieces that have been created up to this point in the entity row, or entity column. And then if you look over to the right under workflow state, See, a lot of these do say vendor, and then at the very bottom, the core item number, that always will stay in the merchant row. It can't be returned back to you as the vendor because it doesn't get created into the merchant row. So that's why when you do the quick search, it can only tell you one of the rows that your item is in. And it usually tells you the item that it has made it the furthest along to. So why would it show up like this? Most likely, you've already worked these items through, you've approved them, they went to your merchant, and then your merchant returned them to you for some reason. The most common reason that they return items to merchants would be to update the cost. So it's just good to be aware of so that you know if you actually need to approve any of your items. You do have to approve it before it can become operational, and orders cannot be made until an item is operational. So we're going to take a look at a few different items that look like this from the quick search screen. I think 3 different items. When we do a quick search for them, this is what they're going to look like. It's going to say they're in the workflow row, and we don't get any more information than that. So in the first example, looking at the Changes tab, we can see that this item has change request pending approval in the vendor row. So if you look under Workflow Status, you can see Vendor Review / Update, so we know something's in the vendor row. If you go further to the left, the type is CHG. CHG stands for change or change request. And then we can look at the change detail here. And this actually tells you what the change request is. It's a cost change. And if you need to do if you created this change request and you want to edit the change request, you can actually click the hyperlink next to change request number. But if somebody else may have made this change request, such as your merchant, and anytime they make a change request, it's always going to come to you in the vendor row, because we have a system of checks and balances in place for certain fields, but especially for cost, because the merchant and the vendor always has to be in agreement on the cost. So if they make a change request for the cost, it's going to come to you. If you do a change request for the cost, it's going to go to them. So the resolution for this would be to approve the item through the vendor row. So if the change request was initiated by somebody else, you are going to find it in your general task list, which we're going to be going over today. Now, newly synced vendor packs, items that you synced over from your data sync operator, they are going to be located in your data catalog task list, and they're going to be indicated under the type column by OPR new. That means operational new. It's an operational item with just a new vendor pack. Now, if you've synced over any other changes from your data catalog provider, it's also going to be in your data catalog task list, and it's going to be indicated by CHG, just like it is down here in the left column. So you would just go and locate your items, and if they're in your new item data catalog task list, you would put them on a grid and approve them. If it's change request, you won't have to change any additional fields most likely. And then if it's vendor packs, there's just going to be a few fields that you have to add in order to approve it. And then if it was initiated by someone else and is in your general task list, you just go find your item, go to the Workflow tab that you see right here. I know you guys don't usually work much with that since you're usually using data sync, and then approve it through there. So in the second example, here under Workflow State, we see Create Change Request. And if it ever says Create Change Request, that means somebody created the change request, but they didn't approve it. This happens a lot, not just by vendors, but it can also happen by merchants or by inventory analysts. They will create the change request, and in their mind, they think that they approved it, but really they just forgot that one step of approving it. So if it says Create Change Request, and you are the one who created this change request, your ID would be located here under Initiator. And then you can just go to Workflow tab and approve. Or if you did it on a grid and it's still out there on a grid, you can go to the grid history to locate that grid and approve. If somebody else initiated a change request, you can contact them. You may or may not know who it is. If it's someone from your company, you might be able to recognize their ID, like if there's somebody else at your company that you work with on your items. If you don't recognize the ID, it's probably somebody internal. So I would email your merchant or inventory analyst and
let them know that this ID initiated a change request, but they didn't approve it, and they need to approve it for it to become operational again. So this third example, this is kind of like the last one, but it's a bit more specific. So this specific item has a new vendor pack, and it is in the vendor role, as we can see here. But the initiator says e-catalog. So whenever the initiator says e-catalog, that means it's something that was synced over. So that means you're going to be able to find it in your new item data catalog task list. And then you can just locate the OPR new items within that task list and put them on a grid, complete the required fields, and approve. So any questions at all about the Changes tab? I know that some people may find it more useful than others. Some like to do a little bit more digging on their own, some don't. But it can save you some time if you know that you can look at the Changes tab and maybe get a quick answer rather than waiting a few hours for the help desk to be able to respond to your email. So any questions at all? Let's see. Anna is asking, are we able to make price changes through IMA? Do you mean price or cost? Like, do you mean retail or cost? Okay. I was going to say, you guys shouldn't be concerned with the retail. Yes. It depends on whether your items are Kmart or Sears. I actually have a slide here in a little bit that addresses that issue exactly. So I'm going to wait to talk about that until we get to there. And then if you have any other questions at that point, you can let me know. Okay, any other questions? Let's see. Susan's asking, if a change is done, does the merchant get notified once submitted? No, not necessarily. If something gets returned to their row, they might be notified, but most internal users have the notifications turned off because they're used to going in their task list every day. So if a change is done, the merchant doesn't usually get a notification. I don't know of an instance actually where they would if it was just a change that was done. So if you want to send them an email and just let them know, give them a heads up, that's fine. You're welcome to do that. Any other questions? Okay. So next we're going to talk about the returned items task list. So if an in-process item is returned to the vendor role for updates, then it's going to go to the returned items task list. So these are items that you have approved through your role. It gets to the merchant, might even get to the inventory analyst, but for some reason they push it back to the vendor. It's going to go in the returned items task list. Now, if your profile is set up correctly and you have the right email on your profile, you will get an alert when anything goes to your returned items task list. To get to your returned items task list, you just hover over Data Catalog and then click Returned Items. Then you can select your pay-dones and your division and then click Get Task List. So whenever something is returned to you, whoever returned that item have to enter a comment about why they're returning the items. So you can view that comment by clicking the Show Details hyperlink on the right side of the page. And then you'll see here there's actually a comment section, and they're saying update cost to $3.95. So then you know that they want you to update the cost to $3.95. So you know why it was returned to you. And that may have been that you either got it wrong initially, or maybe after you approved it, you renegotiated, and you guys agreed on a different cost. That's probably the most common reason items will be returned. I'm sure there are others, but that's probably going to be the most common you're going to cross. Now, they can enter something like just like a period or just like a single letter and get it to return. Hopefully they're giving you more details than that. So if you ever see something returned to you and the instructions aren't clear on what they're wanting you to do, just reach out to your merchant and ask them why they returned it and what you need to do. So in your returned items task list, if you're okay with the change that they're wanting you to make, you select your items here on the left side, and then you click Create Grid. So we're just putting these back on a grid. Now this time, you have to actually name your grid. When you do a new item grid, you never actually have to name that one. It names it like a default name. But anytime you do any other grid, because there are a few we're going to be discussing today, you have to give it a name. So I recommend just giving it some easy name that you can recognize as far as, if you see cost update, you know exactly what items are going to be on that grid in case you don't put it in the same setting. So you enter a grid name and click Save. And you're going to have to find whatever field they're wanting you to update. So if it's the cost, cost is always located on the Vendor Pack tab. So you could click Vendor Pack and then scroll to the right to find Member Costs and then the cost field. Or you can click All and you can scroll through the whole selection to find the fields that you're looking for. Or if it's a different field, if it's not cost and you know what tab it's on, you can go directly to the tab, and it basically just narrows down the list of fields that you have to scroll through. So you make your requested updates and you click Approve. And just like with the new item grid, when it's approved, the status is going to display as completed. If there are errors, it'll let you know, and you just have to go through and resolve the errors and then approve again. So any questions about the returned items task list? Okay. Moving on, we're going to talk about the Change Existing Items feature, also known as the Changes grid. So there are a lot of changes that can be synced from your data pool provider. And if your changes can be synced, we encourage you to do that. It gives you less details in the system that you have to work with. It also keeps your items consistent between your data sync operator and an IMA. So all of these fields listed here are fields that IMA will accept from the data pool catalog to change or update item information. However, there are several fields that you cannot sync over. Most of these cannot be synced over to begin with. There are a few that can be synced over initially, but not for changes. So these specific fields can be changed using the Changes grid. To access, you hover over Data Catalog and you click Change Existing Items. Then the first thing that you do is you select the fields that you want to change in Section 1. So there are several fields that you can select, and you can select more than one. So that's one of the nice things about using the Changes grid. Instead of doing a change individually, you can do it to multiple items, and you can do multiple changes at the same time. So you could change your vendor stock number. You could change your cost for Sears items. You could change the brand, and you could change the fabric metal content, all on the same grid for up to 50 items. So after you select the fields that you want to change, then you enter the specific criteria, either the G10s or the KSN or the core div item. Now what's really nice about these fields, where it's the big text box with the up and down arrow, you can actually copy and paste into these fields. So if you have a list of KSNs from a spreadsheet or from Microsoft Word, you can actually copy that and you can paste it directly into the field. So that's another nice feature. It can save you time from having to type it out. Also, you can search for items if you do not know the exact KSN number or G10 or core div item. And you do that by selecting criteria. You can select as much or as little criteria as you want, but I do believe you have to select at least one. And then you click Search. And it comes back with your search results, and you can select which items you want to put on your grid on the left, and then you just click Create Grid. So as a reminder, no matter which option you use, be sure that you don't put more than 50 items on the grid. It can really start making it run very slowly, and it can slow the system down. And then you just enter a grid name and you click Save. So whenever you are doing a changes grid, whatever fields you selected on that initial setup screen, they're going to display in the default view. You'll see here I had selected cost in the example, and it's displaying in the default view. It's selected here, and then the second line where you can make the changes is green. Now, if you forget something, you can always add it, and I'm going to show you that in a demo here in a minute. But once you make whatever changes you're wanting to make, just go ahead and click Approve. And then just like with the new item grid or the returned items grid, resolve any errors that you receive. And if you don't receive any errors, then the status description will read completed. So a quick note, be sure if you initiate a change to actually approve it, because that's a really common error, not just for vendors. Like I said, it's also really common all across the board. So just make sure that you're actually approving the changes that you create. And then a quick note about the cost changes. So for Sears cost changes, it's different between Sears and Kmart. So for Sears cost changes should be initiated and approved in the vendor role. Merchants can initiate it, but we typically try to have vendors initiate it because then it's just going to go straight to the merchant. And then the merchant also has to approve that change. So Sears cost changes can be done in IMA. For Kmart, they cannot be done in IMA, so there's nothing required by you. The merchant has to actually put in the request through an internal tool that we use. So did you have any other questions about the cost changes? Okay. Okay, for Kmart. You were instructed to use price management, and they're actually having you do that? That's interesting. That's the first I've heard of having an external user use price management. I'm going to have to do some digging on that because from my understanding, the merchant's supposed to be submitting those requests. It's supposed to be done by an internal user for you too. So maybe my information's incorrect. It could be. I definitely don't know everything. I'm going to do some digging though, and I will try to find an answer for you on that. So did you actually have an additional question about it, or just you were confused because they have you do it? Okay. So I am going to do some digging on that though because that wasn't the information I had originally received. Sometimes they change things and they don't pass it along to everybody. Or I may have been told incorrectly in the first place. So that's something that I want to find out for myself as well. I'll let you guys know what I find. And Gwen is saying that she loves the changes grid. Thanks for your comment. Since you're doing all items manually, it saves a lot of time. Yeah, a lot of vendors do find that that does save a lot of time because otherwise you have to do change requests one by one if you're not syncing them and you're not using the changes grid and you're not doing mass changes, which can be mass changes can be kind of complicated and confusing to learn. Doing them one by one can take ages. So I'm glad that you're finding the changes grid useful. They actually just created it maybe a few years ago. Okay, real quick, I'm going to do a changes grid demo. Oh, and before I move over to that, Gwen is asking if you can do changes via OneSync, even if you create the item initially. And you can. You can do changes via OneSync. So if you've created items initially, thank you. If you can mute your phones if you're not speaking, that would be great. That was interesting. So if you have created items manually, but you are set up with the data sync operator, there's some sort of, you have to talk to your data sync provider, but there is a process where you can kind of backfeed that information into data sync to sync them together. And once you have done that process, then you would be able to sync over changes. So I don't know if you're with OneWorld or OpenText or a third party. I know we do have some contact information for OneWorld and OpenText that I can pass out with the PowerPoint today, but I don't know for the third parties who it would be. Okay, let me get over to the changes grid. Okay, so Again, to get to the changes grid, you hover over Data Catalog and you click Change Existing Items. And got logged out. Let me log back in. And I'm going to actually copy and paste a selection of KSNs from Excel. And I'm going to select, let's see, let's do a cost change. I don't know if these are Sears items, actually. We'll see if it lets me do it. They might be Sears items. And then let's change the vendor stock number. And let's change the brand as well. And then in the KSN box, I'm just going to paste the KSNs that I copied from Excel. And then I'm going to click Create Grid. And it can take a few minutes. This is our QA environment, so it's particularly slow. Not a lot of people are in it all the time, so it doesn't get as many system resources allocated to it. So it can run a little slow at times. But the more items you have on your grid, just like with the new item grid, the longer it takes to process. So I'm just going to name this Changes, and I'll put today's date, just the 28th. So you see all the fields that I selected on that main page are located right here. So it's really easy. I can just go in and select my new brand and copy that down. The cost, let's say we renegotiated and the cost is going to go down to $11.50 now. And I want to update my stock number. Let's say I meant to use a different check digit at the end. Let's say I meant it to be 45. Okay, so that's great. But let's say I forgot a field. I meant to include something else in here to update. Let's go to the Vendor Pack tab. And let's say I wanted to update my ship points. Now this is only going to be this isn't going to be the ship point updates I'm going to show you tomorrow in the maintenance session, where you can designate different ship points for different DCs. So this is changing them for all the DCs. But I just wanted to show you how you can select a different item. And even before I select it here, once you go through and you select the checkbox, let's say you want to select multiple ones, you can go back here and click Changes right here. And it'll bring you back to the default view. And in that default view, you're going to see everything that you've selected. So we're going to change this to unavailable, which if we were really changing it to unavailable, it means it can't be ordered. So I doubt we would be making any of these other changes. But I just wanted to show you how you can make those changes. Choose Charles. I think that's what it was originally. Let's do Rancho Way. All right, so all of my changes have been selected, so I'm just going to click Approve. If you're approving it right there and you're not going to be kind of stepping away and coming back, you can just click Approve. You don't need to select Save first, because when you click Approve, it saves it at the same time. But just as a reminder, there is a 30-minute timeout, so if you are going to be walking away from your computer, I do recommend saving it so you don't lose all the work that you did. And that's actually interesting that it did this, because usually it brings you back out to grid history. So I don't know if they're maybe going to be implementing a change. This is definitely not how it usually works. It usually goes back out to grid history, just like with the new item grid, and then it will tell you that it's processing, and it'll tell you it'll tell you that it's processing, and it'll tell you whether it's completed or there are errors. In this instance, it just shows me my errors. So it says the change request for attribute cannot be created because of same attribute and pending change. Okay, that's probably not something you would get in production. You have to excuse QA environments sometimes, because with training environments, it doesn't get as many resources allocated to it, and sometimes it has some weird. So I'm going to deselect brand in this instance, just so I can get this approved through. I do apologize about that, though. That's not, I don't think that's an error you would actually get in production environment. So again, it brings you to your grid history page. You can see it's queued, then it's going to go to processing, and then it will either be completed or it's going to come up with errors. Lost my place. There we go. So any questions about the changes grid? I think it's kind of one of those things, if you haven't used it before, just next time you have a change request you need to do, go in and see if you can do it. Play around with it and just learn how to use it that way. It's one of those things that you really just need to get your hands on. It's not hard. It just takes some practice. Okay, so if there's no questions, I'm going to go on to data catalog notifications. So I know a lot of people are not aware of the data catalog notifications feature, but basically this page will inform you when new items fail to load during data sync, when changes initiated via data sync are either successful or fail. So it doesn't matter if it goes through or it doesn't go through. Anytime you initiate changes, you're going to get some sort of notification. And then when your items have been changed or deleted by an internal role. So sometimes you may have set up some items and approved them through, and then a couple weeks later, before they're fully operational, they've decided to change what they're buying, and they're not buying that specific product anymore. So someone internally may delete those items. If that happens, you will get a notification for items that have been data synced. So to view your data catalog notifications, just hover over Data Catalog and click Data Catalog Notifications. You can input or select filter criteria to focus your list. I think you have to select at least one, but the more that you select, the smaller your list is going to be. So something to keep in mind, you may see a lot of lines for not that many items, and that's normal. You can see multiple lines for a single item. So that's one reason why you might want to filter your list. If you synced over 50 items and then half of them got an error, you might have a lot of lines here that you have to sort through. So you can look at the notification code and the notification description columns for information about the status of the item submitted. And then here, up in the notification code to the right of that, there's this icon that you can click to view the code legend. And in this code legend, you can see kind of a bit more detail about what the numbers mean, because you have basically E1 through E8. And then the descriptions provide specific details for item status, the reason for the outcome, or the possible corrective action. Do keep in mind also that notifications will automatically be deleted after 30 days. You can remove notifications manually. So like I said, if you have a lot of them in there, you might want to delete some of them manually. And you can do that by clicking the box in the action column and then clicking remove up here at the top right. So any questions about data catalog notifications? Basically, it's just a tool that we provide so that if you're, you can sometimes get some more information about why you're having trouble with the syncing. It's definitely not the be-all, end-all, to always provide that answer to your questions. A lot of times, if it's from the data sync side, you have to go back to your data sync provider and talk to them. But it can give you some information. So Mai is asking, what does it mean when it lists E7 change is operational? What is needed to be done? So most likely, so if you remember, one of the reasons why you might get these notifications is that changes initiated during data sync are either successful or they fail. So you will see some sort of message about any change that you try to take over from your provider. So if it says change is operational, then I would think that that would probably signify that your change was successful in being synced over. I don't work with these that often, but that would be my first guess. And if that doesn't seem right to you, like if you have some items and you're like, no, they're not operational, I still don't know what it means, I would reach out to the IMA help desk, imahelp@sears.com, and they might be able to give you some more information, or you might have to actually talk to your data sync provider. I hope that helped. Any other questions at all? Let's see. Is there a place that shows if it is successful or not? So if it's successful with the initial sync or with changes. Okay, so if it's an initial sync and you're syncing over new items, if it's successful, you will not see a notification. They will just be in your task list. Now, if the initial sync for new items is not successful, you will see a notification. So for changes, you will see a notification either way, whether it's successful or it's not successful. And I believe this notification code, it gives you information. Like I know E2 through E5, I'm sorry, I was getting tongue-tied, is all about change requests. I think E7 is well. So if you submit a change request and you try to sync it over, but there's an error with one of our rules in IMA, you would get E2 for your code. If you send a change request and it syncs over properly, you will, but it gets to an internal role. Let's say it gets to the merchant. You sync over a cost. I don't think you can sync over cost changes, but you sync something over, and your merchant or your inventory analyst either doesn't agree with it, or you all decide to go a different route and you change your mind. If they delete that change request, then you will get a notification for E3. Now, if you have a change request that you've approved, that you had synced over, and it gets returned to you by an internal user, then you're going to get a notification for that, and that's going to be E4. If a change request is modified by an internal user, let's say you sync over the change request, it's successful, you approve it, it goes to the next row, but then your merchant or inventory analyst makes some kind of change to your change request before they approve it, then you're going to get a notification with E5. And I don't know about E6. I'm not really sure exactly what E6 means, but I think E7, it does mean that your change synced over successfully. So, okay, any other questions about data catalog notifications? Okay. All right, so next we're going to talk about your general task list. So any change request submitted by another role that requires vendor approval will be found in the general task list. The most common one where you're going to see this will be cost. So to access your general task list, you just hover over task list and you click general. You select your paid items number and your division and click get task list. So just like the returned items task list, you can view the details of the change. So first off, I want to point out, in your task list in this type column, CHG indicates change. So these items are all change requests. So if you click show details on the right side of the column, or right side of the page, the new window will pop up with this information, and you can actually see the change detail and saying the cost is 40. So that means there's a change request for this item. They want to change the cost of the item to 40. So you would select the items and then click multi-edit. So we're not putting these on a grid. So if you're used to working on the grid and you've never really done anything manual, this is actually using a manual feature that is called multi-edit. So you would just select them and then click multi-edit. Then you would click the Workflow tab, which is the tab on the very far right. It brings you to this page. Since this is a change request and there shouldn't be a lot of rules that it needs to run, you can just select Approve. Now, if you select it down here in this very bottom row, it'll go ahead and select that selection for all of the items that are in the workflow waiting to be approved. So this is nice if you have 5 or 10 items. You can just select Approve once rather than doing it for each item individually. After you select Approve, click Check for Errors, Submit Workflow Task. So if there are no errors or there are only warnings, go ahead and click the Submit button again. Now, if you receive any errors, they do have to be corrected before the changes can be approved. If these are items that are here because somebody else made these change requests, and you're receiving errors, then I would reach out to the person that created the change request to see how they want you to resolve the errors. And you can do that again by, you would click into one of the KSNs, so one of these hyperlinked KSNs, and then go to the Changes tab, and then in that far right column under the initiator, you should be able to see the ID of the person who initiated the change. So any questions about the general task list? I know there's kind of several task lists you have to, and it's hard to know sometimes which one to go to. Okay, so speaking of that, we're going to do just a quick review of some of the key points from today's session. So quick search is a snapshot of an item, and it may not be accurate with the location of the item. View the Changes tab to view where each component of the item is located. So in-process items returned to the vendor role for updates will be located in the Returned Items task list. Change requests for some fields can be synced over from your data sync provider. After syncing, approve the changes from the New Item Data Catalog task list. So just another note about that. So if you do sync items over, sync changes over, they will show up in your New Item Data Catalog task list. And all you have to do is bring up your task list, locate those indicated with the CHG change, select them, throw them on a grid, click Approve. You shouldn't have to actually do any changes to them unless you realize you've synced them over incorrectly. But you should just be able to throw them on your grid and approve, and they should go through. So some fields can be updated using the Changes grid or the Change Existing Items feature. Multiple change requests for up to 50 items can be done at once. Review data catalog notifications for details on items that fail to load during sync or to confirm whether changes initiated via data sync were successful or failed. And then finally, change requests submitted by another role that require vendor approval will be located in your general task list. So I know we covered kind of a bunch of different topics, kind of not too briefly, but there's not too much that you can say about some of them. So I just wanted to give an overview of everything that we covered today. So do you have any questions at all about anything that we've covered today? And if not, or if you think of it later on, or if I didn't answer your question, you can email me at vendoruniversity@searshc.com. I know one of the things I want to ask about is there's something that, the price management. I wanted to ask about price management. Well, I'll try to find the answer to that and send a response to you guys when I send out the PowerPoint. Jill is asking, is there a way to change the size run on a case pack? So we're going to be talking about that some tomorrow, but you cannot actually change the configuration on an existing item. So if a carton has the wrong configuration, you have to create a new carton. And we are going to be talking about that a bit more tomorrow. And then Michelle's asking, anything we input in Spin update in IMA, or are they separate? I know when items are initially created in Spin, they get created in IMA. They kind of backfeed into IMA. Now, I've never worked with Spin at all. Do you do change requests directly in Spin? Is that what you're referring to? Edit items in Spin. I'm really not sure. It may. I'll have to ask about that as well. So I have the price management tool I want to ask about, and I also want to ask about change requests done in Spin, whether or not the edits backfeed to IMA. So anybody else have any questions? I am going to stay on the line for a little bit. So if you have something you want to talk to me about or you think of a question later, you feel free to ask at any point. I'll stay on the line for at least 5 more minutes, maybe all the way to 3 if there are questions. Thank you guys. See you tomorrow.